Okay, welcome everyone to my continuation of what are my favorite theorems, a very biased collection, as usual. Today I would like to talk about permutations because, well, symmetric groups, permutations are everywhere. We like to permute permutations, shuffling cards, permutations are cool. But actually I would like to tease them a little bit in some sense, and we'll see what it is. And the, well, name of this video is related to a game which is called the jeu de taquin, which I will pronounce wrongly like 712 times during this video. So coming from work of mostly French mathematicians from the 1960s, 1970s on symmetric groups, and very much in disguise. So it's one of these beautiful theories that kind of, if you've seen it, it's kind of, yes, this is how it should work. And if you haven't seen it, it's like, what on earth does it have to do with notion X? So permutations are encoded in a certain type of box configurations, and this is kind of very well known, and some various combinatorics on those box configurations correspond to combinatorics of permutations. But if you really see it for the first time, it's like this, what on earth is going on feelings. But eventually you see it for the 112th times, and it's just like, yep, box combinatorics, permutations, that's essentially the same. And this is one of these instances which has a nice, name, which is a funny name corresponding to a game. And then there's another funny name, and nobody really knows where that comes from, but I will go into some details on the last slide. So let's just get going. Very combinatorial today. Eventually there will be permutations, but for a long time we won't see any permutations at all, which is kind of the miracle that's going on here. Okay, so let me tell you where the name comes from. So in English, the corresponding game is called the 15 puzzle. You might have seen it before. So you have, well, you could also call it the 16 puzzle. It's not quite clear to me whether I want to call it the 16 or 15 puzzle. So you have 16, here's the last one, 16 of those little rectangles, squares, and you should slide them around. So you have 15 of them, the 16th is missing, and you should slide them around such that they end up in, well, this position here. The black was a really bad choice of color. Let me correct that. So that you end up in the position 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, and this is called the 15 puzzle. And the French name for it, this is where the title comes from, jeu de taquin, is, well, jeu de taquin. What a surprise. So it's called literally teasing game. I guess it's a little bit annoying or whatever. But anyway, so today I would like to explain the math version of this. And it looks a little bit different, but it's essentially the same. So you shift some numbers around in a precise given way. And this describes permutations, which is kind of the fun point about it, because here's a real world game, which I actually don't know how old it is, but it's certainly very, very old and well known. And it has a mathematical incarnation, and that happens quite often, so that games people have come up with a long time ago have some mathematical second life, if you want. And in this case, it's just true. And again, let me mispronounce it one more time, and then I will go with teasing game. So the jeu de taquin is exactly what we are looking for here. So the 15 puzzle or the teasing game in math. And this is how it works. I would like to think about integer partitions. So here's a partition, 5, 4, 2, 2. It's a partition of just sum up the numbers. So I see here 13, this sums up to 13, and the way to draw it is as follows. So there's kind of well-known drawing of partitions. So in the partition, you have the numbers already ordered, and you use this to draw these box configurations, which are called Young diagrams, named after Young, actually works in this case. And it's very simple, depending on convention. So I'm going with this convention, which is called the English convention. There's also the French convention. So maybe in this, video where I talk about a lot of French things, I should have gone with the French convention. But anyway, I will go with this convention. That was just a lot of waffle. Let me come back to the math here. So we have a partition, 5, 4, 2, 2, or anything you like. And the way to display it is you draw 5 boxes, you draw 4 boxes, you draw 2 boxes, and you draw 2 boxes. And you get this box configuration for the green one here, which is called a Young diagram. And a slight generalization of this is called a skew Young diagram, where you just take 2 of them and take 1 of them and remove one from the other. So here I remove the 2, 1 from the 5, 4, 2, 2. And I get this, in this case, the black one, the black shape. And that's called a skew-Young diagram. And they play a huge role. Well, for now, we just go with it, but they play a huge role in studying permutations, which is a bit, well, surprising, as I said. And really, they correspond to a pair of partitions, well, where you take the kind of the big partition and you remove the small partition. So here the 5, 4, 2, 2 and the 2, 1. And usually in this game, you like to fill them with numbers from, well, I have 10 boxes, so I fill them with numbers from 1 to 10. Why do I have 10 boxes? Because this is a partition of 13, this is a partition of 3, so I took out 3, I have 10 boxes left, and I just fill them with the numbers from 1 to 10, and no repetitions, and just the numbers from 1 to 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And I would like to do this, and this is called what people call standard, and this is the only thing I'm considering in this video, is I would like to do this such that it increases if you read along rows, and it increases if you read along columns. So here 2 is smaller than 4, so it increases, here it increases, here it increases, and here's the last one that increases along the columns. And let's look at the rows. It increases, as you can see here, and it gets bigger as you move from left to right, and it gets bigger as you move from top to bottom. And that's a combinatorial object I like to study. And the teasing game is the following idea, an equivalence relation on those diagrams. It works as follows. It's exactly whatever kind of moves you can do in the 15 puzzle. So here you have the same shape from before, and you can see that you can do the sliding move. So you take 2, you slide it to here, so you have an open position here, you can slide 4 to here, you have an open position here, you can slide 6 to here, and you end up with this guy. So those two are equivalent, because this is the equivalence relation we force upon our tableau. So there are two versions of it, like the shifting that I have here, and kind of the inverse, where you would shift 6, 4, 2 in the opposite direction. So those are the, well, let me try again, the taquin moves on those funny tableau, and you define an equivalence relation on those set of tableaus. So if there's a set of all of them, huge collection, you define an equivalence relation of them, and that defines, well, a set with an equivalence relation, where it's really, really unclear if you just see it. Why does it be interesting? Well, it's certainly related to the 15 game. It's really just the 15 puzzle moves that you do here. But what on earth does it do in mathematics? It's a very, very different question. And this came up in the 70s and 80s by Knuth and co-authors, not co-authors, Knuth and other mathematicians, and they studied relations on the symmetric group coming from its, well, analog, its one description in terms of those Young diagrams. And it turns out that this describes essentially permutations in the following way. So what Schützenberger then showed in the 1970s is that row reading, I will explain row reading in a second, plus this funny equivalence, the teasing game equivalence, the jeu de taquin, gives a presentation of certain type of object, which I'm going to explain in a second as well. It's called the plactic monoid. Weird name. I will come back to the name on the final slide, but for now it's just called the plactic monoid. Anyway, row reading is a very simple operation. So here's our tableau from before, and we just read along rows 2, 5, 9, 2, 5, 9. Then comes the next row 3, 4, 6, 3, 4, 6. Then comes the next row 1, 7, 1, 7. Then comes the final row 8, 10, 8, 10, and I forgot to mark the first one. So you have a lot of those tableaux. You have one for each kind of filling of numbers, and you just read it off, and you get these sequences of numbers. And that's exactly kind of the plactic monoid. The plactic monoid are just words in the natural numbers. So here's an example of a word in the natural number. In the natural numbers, modulo a certain type of equivalence, and modulo certain types of, well, how you arrange numbers. So it's kind of a word in the sense like everything appears once. And let's not stay about the equivalence too much. This is called the Knuth equivalence, and it's certain equivalence relations, exchanging the order of symbols. Okay, but the point is the same presentation of the same beast is given by, well, those skew shapes and the jeu de taquin. Now I've said it like 5,012,000 times. The teasing game equivalence, which is kind of fun. So an algebraic object that is just described as words in natural numbers modulo some equivalence is given by this funny 15 puzzle type move objects on, well, a 15 puzzle type object, I guess. And that's kind of fun and kind of interesting. And the question is, what does this plectic monoid actually means? Where does it come from? And it came up in work of Knuth, who called it the tableau monoid, which is maybe the better name anyway. But anyway, it's nowadays known as plectic monoid, and it models really permutations. So the Robinson-Schensted Knuth correspondence, says Knuth again, says that permutations are essentially the same as pairs of those Young tableau, and they arise now under the same well, the Young tableaus correspond to the same permutation, so the P1, if and only if the P's are Knuth equivalents, or the words that you get from them are Knuth equivalents. So this describes essentially the equivalence relation that you get on the set of permutations by its translation to Young tableau. And this has many applications in combinatorics and representation theory. For example, the same equivalence will describe certain types of cells in hacker algebras and symmetric groups, and all of that fun stuff. So there's a huge bunch of mostly combinatorics related to the statement that a certain type of equivalence relation on permutations is the same as this funny and pretty simple set of moves on, so the teasing game moves on these kind of box configurations, like those guys here. There was a big breakthrough, actually, and has been cited many, many times. And, well, because it's now related to permutations, I'm not going to explain that in the video, but it's also related to a lot of other parts of mathematics, because a lot of mathematics is related to permutations. So this equivalence models quite a few things, and that's pretty impressive. So it comes from a silly, well, maybe I shouldn't call it silly, a game, 15 puzzle, teasing game, whatever you want to call it. Let me just, so in the original paper from the 70s, it's a paper in French, it's this plectic monoid, so kind of very strange name. Where does it come from? Well, Wikipedia claims the following without saying that this is true, and as far as I know the story, I've heard this several times, so I will repeat it here, but it nothing like this appears in the original paper or anything, so it's a little bit of guessing where it comes from, but it kind of makes sense. So plectic monoid seems to come from plate tectonics, which fits very nicely to the French word here. So this picture here, where you have, well, whatever, the South American plate and the African plate, and they can slide past one another, over one another, under one another. I have no idea which slides underneath here, but you know how the plate tectonic essentially works, and then there's some sliding involved. And similarly here in our little game, there's some sliding involved. So there's in some sense the the game of the plate tectonics of the Earth, and that's where people guess the name plectic monoid comes from. But again, take this with a grain of salt. I think it works pretty well for me, like the sliding of the plates, but the authors might have had a completely different reason to call it plectic monoid, but now it's called plectic monoid. Nothing we can do about it. Anyway, so there is this funny notion of an equivalence that comes from a game, essentially. And the plectic monoid kind of describes various forms of permutations, which I wasn't even really able to cover in this video, but it describes various forms of permutations. And then this jeu de taquin game, I said it now like 500,012 times, and it was always pronounced wrong. I really apologize. I should just call it the 15 puzzle. So the 15 puzzle on mathematics then kind of appears everywhere because it's related to permutations and how permutations actually are related to those funny box configurations, so the integer partitions type picture. Anyway, I hope you're playing games right now. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will hope to see you next time.